Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and today we are taking a look at something that is a long time in the making. That is the PolyMega GC01 gun controller. This light gun was originally announced all the way back in 2019 at E3 in LA. I was there with Kelsey and others, and well, now it's been 6 years, and in that time, several other solutions have come out since then. However, PolyMega owners have been patiently waiting all this time. In this video, we're going to find out, was it worth the wait? Let's find out. So what do you need to know about this? Well, it uses at its heart Sinden's optical technology to play older light gun games on a modern HD television. And like I said, there's been lots of other solutions that have come out in the last 6 years, including Sinden's own light gun. And you see the two of them here side by side. I've actually reviewed that light gun in the past, probably about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer. But you can see here that essentially it's using their optical technology in the PolyMega version of it. Obviously a lot smaller, a lot lighter. Now it comes with an 8-foot cord, and one of the unique things about it is that it has an analog stick at the back of it, which you use to navigate, also get into the menu and stuff like that. And very specifically, it only works with the PolyMega clone console. It doesn't work with a PC. That's very important to know. The other thing to know about this is that it doesn't have recoil. So Sinden actually sells a version, it's an upgrade to theirs, where it does have recoil. The PolyMega, probably to keep the price down and also to keep it lighter, does not have that option. And this supports light gun games on the Saturn, the PlayStation 1, the Super Nintendo, and also the Super Famicom, as well as the Mega Drive or the Sega Genesis, the Sega CD, and it also supports the original Nintendo or Famicom. And this is for sale at $109, so that's slightly cheaper than the Sinden light gun, which costs $115 for its base. But like I said, if you want to add the version that has recoil, well, that's going to set you back $170. Also, the Sinden has an optional arcade foot pedal, which again, this doesn't have or support. And so this is the cheapest option out of all of those, but you do have to buy the PolyMega console, right? So that right there is probably going to be something that will deter a lot of people. But if you happen to have the PolyMega console like I do, then this might be a good solution for you. Although as we dig deeper into these games, there's some caveats. The other thing to know about this, it's very important, is that neither the PolyMega or this light gun comes with any games pre-installed. The PolyMega, by design, only works with your physical games that you have in your collection. Now, I happen to have a bunch of light gun games in my collection across several different systems ready to try. You see a bunch of them here. But I want people to know, to be very clear here, again, if you buy this gun, that doesn't necessarily mean you can play anything. You've got to also own the games. Now that we kind of have all that out of the way and we sort of know what this thing is, let's go ahead and start with the good. You calibrate this gun in the settings of the PolyMega itself. It's actually really easy to do. It'll show up as a light gun depending on if you plug it into USB port 1 or 2, which that is kind of important because some of the games, depending on what games they are and the system that you're playing, they may expect you to have a real controller plus the light gun or just using the light gun itself. The good news is it's completely flexible. And it's also really easy to navigate the PolyMega console interface just using the light gun itself because of that analog stick at the back of it. You basically just push in on it and it brings up the menu at any point and you can navigate around. There's enough buttons on the side of this thing to handle pretty much anything that you would want to do. So with this plugged into port 1, you don't typically need to use another controller, which is kind of nice. And I started messing around with PlayStation 1 games, and for the most part, actually, they just work. You just launched it with the gun plugged in, and you'll notice that a blue border appears around the gameplay screen. So that's how this is working, is that it's got, I think, like a little camera on the front of it, and it's basically tracking where you're aiming using that border. Some games you'll want to actually calibrate within the game itself. So it's important to know that, again, you can calibrate it for the system, and you can also, in a lot of games, calibrate it for the specific game. I highly recommend you do that. It's also important to mention that if your newer HD television has a game mode, you may want to select that for the best results. So that way your TV isn't adding any post-processing or adding any additional latency. And so I've done that on my television here. And we started playing games like Time Crisis, as well as Area 51 and some of the other games on the PlayStation 1. And, again, I mentioned they just kind of worked immediately. And for the most part, they actually played pretty well. That said, there definitely is some latency compared to, say, a real arcade setup with a CRT. It's important to know that latency is not really unique to this device. We've noticed latency in pretty much every modern light gun game solution over the years because it's hard to do this with older games that were designed to be played on a CRT. So just be aware, depending on the specific game and your setup, you may notice latency. We certainly did. That said, most of the PlayStation 1 games and even the Saturn games that I played, they work pretty well. Now let's move on to some of the things that I struggled with a little bit. So I ran into a snag with the original Point Blank game on the PlayStation 1. If you know this game, you know that it's a must play. I love this game, and I was very excited to try it. Well, it wouldn't launch. All it would do is basically just put the blue borders around, and then it just kind of locked up and it just sat there. Now, what's weird about this is that the sequel played. So Point Blank 2 fired up and we were able to play that just fine. But every time I went back to the original, it wouldn't start. Well, after a bit of troubleshooting with PolyMega, it turns out that I had to sideload an original PlayStation 1 BIOS from the internet. PolyMega does not give it to you in order to get this game to work. Every other PlayStation 1 game that I've tried over the years on the PolyMega has just worked flawlessly, and I've never had to do this before. So it kind of stumped me, actually. I didn't realize I was going to need to do that. And I guess there are a handful of PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn games, Sega CD games that won't work out of the box with the PolyMega, and that you'll need to go and find that original console BIOS and then sideload it. So I just want to mention it. Just be aware. Moving on to a different console, you gotta try some Duck Hunt, right? It's the classic on the NES. So many people are familiar with it and love it. It's a great game. And it's funny because I was actually able to play this game okay. There's definitely some lag with this, and we could not make it any better. But Paul, he wasn't able to play this hardly at all. I mean, he really struggled with the latency on this one. He found it almost unplayable, and we kept going in and trying to recalibrate it. We tried it sitting down, we tried it standing up and far away or whatever. It just never felt right to him, and it never felt right to me either. Again, that latency is just kind of annoying. Be interesting to know if, maybe a different television would help with this. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it's not great. Next, we moved on to the Super Nintendo and the Super Scope. And here is where I hit a couple snags. The first one being, you have to plug in a real controller into port 1 and then move the light gun over to USB port 2 and configure them that way in the system settings. And this really threw me for a loop. I had no idea why it would require this because, again, PlayStation 1 games work fine when you're just using the light gun, but suddenly now you have to go in and you have to use a real controller in port 1 and the light gun in port 2. And so that got me a little further into this. But then when I launched either of the Super Nintendo games that I own, I was stuck. Like, it wasn't, again, detecting me selecting things, and I didn't know what was going on. Well, turns out this is a little bit more my fault, and that's because I've never actually messed with a real Super Scope before. And I didn't realize that it doesn't play like a gun, it's more of a bazooka. And so, you know, with the real Super Scope, you push a fire button on the top like a bazooka, and the PolyMega tries to emulate that. So the trigger on the PolyMega does nothing. So once I was told, oh, you have to push one of the side buttons to launch your missile or your gun or whatever, then I was able to actually play these games. I'll be curious to see if I'm the only one who was tripped up with this. I honestly think that PolyMega should probably just map both the trigger and the side buttons to the fire option, just so that it works and people don't have to try to figure that out. And then here's another kind of weird one, and it's Corpse Killer on the Sega CD/32X, which is a full motion game. And this was a bit of a challenge to get working. Again, I had to reach out to PolyMega to kind of get some assistance with this one. Initially, it wouldn't detect the gun when I started the game, even when I went into the settings and chose to turn it on. So I was like, what's going on here? It just was not working in the game. Well, we figured it out. It turns out the solution is to launch the game, then go into the settings and turn the gun on. Then you soft reset the game, and that'll get it to detect it. Then you go into the game itself. Then in the game, you need to calibrate it, and then it works. But it also acts kind of weird compared to some of the other games because the cursor doesn't move as you aim. Instead, every time you fire, then that little fire thing shows up and it's moved. It's hard to describe, but it's very odd. It's probably the way that this game is programmed, but it just goes to show that there isn't really one way to do these light gun games. And PolyMega has had to try to figure out each one of them to make it work with this particular, light gun. And so that was definitely frustrating trying to figure out some of this stuff because there wasn't a lot of help online. I had to kind of figure some of the stuff out. But I've been told that there's going to be an in-depth FAQ detailing all of this when the, light gun launches and it gets into the hands of customers. So that'll be very handy for you if you buy this in the future. So, what did we think? Well, to be honest, after a 6-year wait, I think it's just okay. If you've already got a gaming PC and you've got another light gun solution, I don't think there's any reason for you to jump on this, But, like if you're like me and if you have the PolyMega system, you use it, which I do, and you want to add light gun games to that setup, and you're kind of okay with dealing with some of these setup weirdnesses and latency that comes along with solutions like this, $110 is a pretty reasonable amount of money, I think.
Yeah, in general, it feels okay. It feels light. I'd like a little more pull on the trigger. It very much feels like a button, not a trigger. But, overall, it's decent. If I had one of these at a party, I wouldn't be unhappy, depending on how many beers you fed me. But yeah, it's fine.
I do wonder if it's even possible to make a perfect light gun solution for these older games. Is it possible? Is it just too complex to do? Part of me thinks it kind of is. But I would love to know what you think. Do you have a PolyMega already and are you excited to get the gun controller? Or do you have some other solution? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.